Sheila, I know we were talking a little bit before everything began this evening about there's a lot of really positive momentum in terms of what you're doing, and I want you to just kind of again just describe a little bit about what you are doing with the unhoused, and what essentially has changed since we talked for the story about a month ago.
Tangible focus that I'm currently spending most of my time on is a project that is called Indoor Villages. So it's a project that it was created in response to listening to people who are currently experiencing unsheltered homelessness and hearing what their priorities are, and especially listening to what has kept them from just being housed in the way that they desire to be housed, what has kept them from using the assets that we do have. We have shelter assets, as we all know on this call. Some of them work really well for some people, and some of them work okay, and some of them don't work at all for some others. And trying to literally figure out what those barriers were with people who are currently unsheltered or have lived experience of unsheltered homelessness, and then create a solution that's deployable by winter. So there's a lot about the way we've been doing this that is very fast. I was listening to Huda thinking, I love a process that gives time for a community to really engage and to determine, co-create is the word that you used, and co-create and co-define the problem. I think for most of us, we all can see what the problem is. There are people living in tents in the middle of our city, but we know that the reason we're here is due to from the beginning of our city, we have engaged in systemic practices that decrease the majority of our community's access to wealth. And for many people, wealth is real estate, and we have experienced blatant racism in the allocation of those resources and the access to those resources. So that is our history. And then we also have to look at the fact that we have a Native population that we exiled them. Not only did we exile them, but we of course stole their land, then exiled them, then brought them back and asked them to disregard their own culture and their own worldview, and told them they needed to assimilate to our worldview. And so it's this and more that's led us to where we are now. So I want to say that yes, the project I've been most focused on is Indoor Villages, but the project I'm most committed to is placing people with direct experience in leadership roles. So the good news is that this project, Indoor Villages, has received a lot of community support, both from people who are currently unhoused, people who have, as one of my friends said about the Kenwood encampment, and this is not to say anything about Kenwood, they are my neighbors. I'm in Loring Park right now. He said, oh, my neighbors discovered unsheltered homelessness this summer. And because previously people who were living outdoors, they were hiding wherever they were. They were in MnDOT right away. They were in places that many of us wouldn't normally go. And we didn't have to look at what it means to be unsheltered. Not really. We might have heard about them. We might have participated in clothing drives or food drives, but we haven't really seen the terror that goes into being a person living outdoors in a tent. And it is terrorizing for everybody, but it is particularly, this is the women's press, it is particularly terrorizing for women and non-binary individuals, because we know how vulnerable we are as women, as non-binary people in this culture. If you couple that with being in the middle of the city in a tent, all sorts of horrible things come your way, and you have to survive them. So we look at these people who are our neighbors, and I was so interested in what Huda said about become willing. So what I feel like my real project is for us to all become willing to see people who simply don't have houses as our neighbors. They're as much our neighbors as people next door to me in an apartment building. And so if we look at them like that, we would never expect our neighbors to live in undignified housing. We would never expect them, I'm sure we've all heard narratives, well, they have places to go. Why would they be in a tent if they had, and they have places to go? Well, I always ask myself, if they have a place to go, what is that place like when they're willing to be outdoors, submitting themselves to the vulnerability that it means to be intense? Now, there's a lot of good things about encampments that nobody wants to talk about, and that's something that we want to make sure we recreate in indoor villages and in several of the other projects I'm working on. People often will leave a housing placement and come to an encampment. Why? Because they're seeking community. They want to be connected. They certainly want to be connected who they feel affiliated with, they identify with, and that is something real or imagined. And I say real or imagined because I think all of us have heard a lot of conversation about what is the truth about unsheltered homelessness right now. The solutions we've been offering, many people are not desirable solutions for them. And we do not have nearly enough solutions, even among those that aren't necessarily ideal. On any given day, you might hear someone say, well, gosh, I've heard there are shelter beds available. Why aren't those people in those shelter beds? Well, there's a lot of reasons people have objections to going to shelter, but even if they were all willing to go, there's approximately 800 to 1,600 people living unsheltered right now in the city of Minneapolis. It's the number varies depending on who you ask, but even if we were to say it's 800, 50 beds would never accommodate all of them. So I just think that we need to be willing to reframe our relationship with people who currently don't have a home. And that's why we say they're experiencing homelessness. We learn not to say someone is homeless. But now let's take it further. I really love what many of my Native colleagues say about people who are unsheltered. They say our unsheltered relatives. They are our relatives, and we are supposed to be caring for them in a way that they want to be cared for. And so that just hasn't happened. We have some incredibly generous people in this community, but we have not done the job we should be doing of listening to people who are directly impacted by this issue. And when I also listened to Hood to talk about criminal justice reform, as we know, our housing practices completely X out people who have criminal histories. We have a new law on the books as of July where landlords are not supposed to discriminate in that way. Well, guess what? Landlords are challenging that law, and many of them are not complying with the law. We've got too much going on in this community where we are not able to work together to uphold those values we say we support. And so even though we have that law, many people are still being denied housing, although their felony conviction was, sometimes over 10 years ago. I've talked to several people who've been denied, and even though that is illegal, there's no enforcement of that law going on. I shouldn't say no, there's not enough enforcement of that law going on. So indoor villages, in terms of how people, the updates, I'm sorry, I'm trying to answer your questions, Nikki. Since the article was published, we have a new operator. We have the operator who has shown to be really practically, they have just shown themselves to be so effective at getting people directly from encampments into hotels, and they don't leave the hotel until they have a home. So it's the hotel to home programs. Many of the people who are in those programs, they're not ready. They're just not ready. When Huda says, are we ready to have conversations? You have to be ready to make a change in your life. We all know that. So indoor villages is a low barrier place. Anybody can come indoors and start to seek shelter and sanctuary. Then we will give them all of the services they might need that can move them to the next step. So now that we have Avivo as the operator, we are just thrilled because the funding for the hotel to home model, that's COVID related, and that ends this year. Indoor villages can take those best practices and create a sustainable model. The other exciting news towards sustainability is that the White Earth Nation, the Tribal Council, has signed a letter of intent with us to participate in this program, because over and over again, when we look at the disparities of who is unsheltered in Minnesota, we have approximately 20,000 people. If you are white in Minnesota, you have a 1 in 1,250 chance of becoming unsheltered. If you are African American, you have a 1 in 100 chance. And if you are Native, you have a 1 in 50 chance of experiencing unsheltered homelessness. And so we are trying to really look at those disparities, because they're just the disparities we see reflected in our culture everywhere you look, and figure out how do we listen so that we can respond in a way that people from these cultures want to be part of and will be in leadership. So White Earth as our partner will be an intrinsic part of the leadership of indoor villages. Working towards culturally specific shelter is something we're hearing again and again. So that doesn't mean only for Native people, that does mean for African American people. And then I joke with people who start to get all scared that we're not going to take care of white people. Well, first of all, we're fine. We've been taken care of just fine by this culture. And second, when you look at the number of white people who are experiencing this, more and more are, because of our economy and because of the pandemic. But really, if we focus on a large operation, which is indoor villages, working towards a culturally specific operation, and simultaneously create a shelter for African American people led by African American organizations, white people will do just fine. So these are the things that those I feel like are my real projects, and they manifest in this specific project, Indoor Villages, which, as far as I can tell, will be able to open early December. And part of what readers can do, and everyone, I'm so excited to meet Sharonda and Huda, because I really want to talk with you about learning about your work and how we can possibly collaborate, because the only way Indoor Villages works and maintains our values is if community is intrinsically involved. So we have a community advisory committee and we have an oversight committee. The oversight is more about accountability, and the community advisory is how do we make sure community continues to interact, and how do we take the piece of awareness that has grown in Minneapolis around unsheltered homelessness, because people living next to park encampments have become engaged and involved. We want to continue that engagement so that people can further see unsheltered people as their neighbor and not as another, and certainly not as someone undeserving of the very same things that we all feel we deserve. So those are some of my updates.
Very good updates. Thank you.